and knowing the books of the Bible and a little bit of church history, but there's no preparation for how am I going to deal with that person who was sexually abused? How am I going to deal with a young lady in my church who was just trafficked? Right? So I think there's a huge gap and a huge void.
Human justice.
Yeah, and even substance abuse. Listen, it's interesting. A lot of the people that I'm seeing in my private practice are people that are in the church, people that are sitting in the pews. And you got people sitting in the pews that are struggling with alcoholism. You got people sitting in the pews that are suffering from childhood, sexual abuse, who have tons of problems with their relationships and can't hold a steady relationship because it manifests at some point
in every relationship, and it's a vicious cycle that
absolutely
continues to go.
And it's men just as it is women, and we need to recognize that. Once again, we need to be open and receptive to understanding that not everything is spiritual. And what I mean by that is that...
Please say that again, Pastor.
Not everything is spiritual. And I say that because there's this custom of let's just pray over you and let's leave it there and put it in God's hands. Once again, I believe in the power of prayer.
Yeah.
But I think people are using that as a crutch because they don't have anything else for the person.
To say. They're lacking in.
Yeah.
So
right?
I wanted, that's really good. I wanted to ask you this because that leads me right into this question. So what are some of the signs, since we're talking about trauma and how it manifests with some of, it manifests in everything, in your marriage, the way you treat your kids.
Absolutely.
What are some of the signs if there's dads or moms watching and they may think their spouse, they're not sure. They're like, how do I define if this is learned behavior, if this is trauma? How do we, what are some of the things they could be looking at? I know it's not going to be a pinpoint perfect answer,
right,
but some of the things they could be looking at.
If you find yourself irritated a lot, if you find yourself with low self-esteem, if you find yourself questioning what you're doing, that sense of, as I said earlier, that sense of guilt, that sense of shame, isolation. One of the things that I've always, once again, I became a dad at 16. One of the things that I tried to do with my son is to always be there for him as much as I could. So when you don't engage with your children, then that may be a learned behavior or maybe a lived experience, because you didn't see that, you didn't experience that. So I think some people may even suffer from PTSD, right? So PTSD ain't only for going to war, right? Because people that tend to associate only, PTSD has to do with any traumatic event, right? So there's a lot of people with PTSD, once again, isolation. And then, so what all that does is compounded, and then our way of parenting, we become numb.
And we're a shell of ourselves.
Absolutely. Right? We show no affection, no emotion.
Nada.
We're just cold. So if you find yourself in any of those, and the list can be exhaustive, right? A lot of things.
Yeah.
So, but if you find yourself irritated, numbness, not wanting to engage, so let me say it like this. I think trauma, at least for us as men, has caused an identity crisis because we don't know who we are. We know we're males, right? Hopefully nowadays, right?
Yeah.
Hopefully, we know we're males,
For sure.
right? We know we're males. We know we're supposed to be doing something, but many of us don't know what to do or why we have to do it. Let me give you 3 quick points. what's going to help us with our identity? Number one, and this is all biblical. You guys in your time can look at it. Number one, as males, as fathers, we're supposed to be prophets in our house. Now, what does a prophet do?
Prophesy.
Okay. But when you prophesy, what are you doing?
You're communicating what the Lord gave you.
You're communicating what the Lord has, right? For the people.
So they're not saying, some people can take this like you're sitting there and you start like going into what you see in service.
Yeah, no,
That's
no,
not
no.
what he's saying.
So
Right.
what
Okay.
I thought that for a second, but I'm
No.
like, no, that's not what he's saying.
So as a
it's not like
prophet-
sit there, okay, I'm going to prophesy over
Yeah,
you.
no.
That's not what he's saying. That's,
So what I'm saying is, we'll explain a little bit
yeah,
more.
yeah. I get it.
Bro, I got PTSD from
No,
tranquilo.
but I knew that's what he meant. I was like, wait up. Is he saying? No.
So as a prophet, you are giving God's word to your family.
You're instructing and leading them.
You're guiding.
You mean
Right?
it's applicable outside of the family, outside of the house?
Absolutely.
Well,
So
obviously it
you're-
is, but the reason why I'm asking is because I'm trying to separate the two from what we just.
Yeah. So your identity doesn't change where you are. Your identity is always with you wherever you go.
Okay.
Now, whether you want to change it to adapt to the environment, that's a different story.
Yeah.
Right? Which we do that a lot. But you're supposed to be a prophet, number one, because once again, as a prophet, you're representing God in front of your family. Number two, you're supposed to be a priest. A priest represents the family in front of God. Right? And the third, you're supposed to be king of your domain. Now, when you have trauma manifesting in your life, you're going to question who you are. And this is what's going to happen. I think what people, and once again, this is, I think, part of the teaching that has been given to us in the Latino Pentecostal Christian is that the man goes to work and the woman takes care of the kid. When in reality, it is the man's job not only to work, but to raise the kid. The woman's responsibility is to support the man in that process. So then for the dad that has the trauma, for him it's easier to pawn the responsibility off on somebody else. Because if he has to deal with it, it's going to trigger him. And he doesn't want to be triggered. He wants to stay away from it as much as possible. So the responsibility is passed on to the mom, and the responsibility is passed on to the Sunday school teacher, and to the teacher at school, and to everybody else
Accept the parent.
except he himself. Why? Because trauma has caused an identity crisis.
That's the root of it.
This is so good.
No, because you have to. I feel like if you don't deal with it, it'll hinder every section of your
Absolutely.
life.
Absolutely.
It's connected to, and then where it's really toxic and scary for me is that we can use learned behavior that we learned at church to subside what really hasn't been dealt with. And I've dealt with it. Everybody that's going to church for a long time, there's refranes that church people say when they're really dealing with a problem, but they know how to say a refrain so automatically
Right.
that it covers.
Correct.
And then they lead their kids like that, they talk like that, they maneuver like that, they treat their wife like that, and they go on some cliche that some pastor told
Correct.
when they haven't dealt like, and it's like something you said, Pastor, like it takes an extreme amount of courage to be vulnerable to see your deficiencies inside. Because yes, I can get my theology right, I understand the Bible, like I understand the cross, I get the gospel, but in reality, what I haven't dealt with internally. And we can only go so long covering it up until eventually it blows up in our marriage and we get divorced, or our kids and they leave the house. All these things, and that's why like sometimes it would hurt my heart when we were here in Christian circles. Like, en la iglesia es un cristiano, pero en la casa es un animal. Like, he treats his
Yes.
family like this and
Absolutely.
like that, and he doesn't know how to steward his kids correctly or his wife. And so many times, like, I would hear that refrain, well, no, my first ministry, this is how we say, so our first ministry is my home. I still with my wife, and we know how to cover it good, like we know how to, but we still haven't dealt with the trauma.
Right.
But we know how to refrain it and say, yeah, yo soy un pastor primero en mi casa y yo dirijo a mi esposa y mis hijos, correcto.
Right.
Pero en realidad, loco, cuando estoy solo, estoy bajándome la cerveza, estoy haciendo 20,000 cosas que it's just hard. And it's even like, I put myself in the position of seeing where I'm vulnerable and where I lack in that area. And going to counseling with Pastor Jose, it took me hearing an audiobook and feeling safe enough, because there was a notion for a majority of my life where I believed it was crazy. Why am I? No, that's a far-seen thing. I would think like, no, ese tipo that's going to counseling, Alan, ese tipo está deprimido. He's depressed. That's why he goes. He doesn't believe in Jesus enough. The gospel is not, he's not getting a real gospel. There's not a real gospel message that's impacting his life. And no, bro, you could be going all that and still be going to hell personally.
Absolutely.
Like, you could be going in the ditch. I know dudes that know their word, they're solid biblically, and they're smoking blunts because they're struggling and they haven't dealt with it internally. The book I was reading was Lecrae's book, and he talks about how he needed to find first the right kind of psychologist that he could sit with and he felt safe with, where he could deal with, because he was being this person on stage impacting thousands of people, but once he started talking about topics that dealt with his race and how the white evangelical church was, and that's a whole other conversation. He was dealing with, like, should I continue to follow the faith, or these white people that are mixing their politics with the church? He was struggling, and he resorted to what he knew: drinking, smoking.
Right.
This is him saying it, and until he went and dealt with some of the resentment from his father, like all these things came onto light, and he was able to be a better father, a better husband, and so that got me thinking. I was like, if that dude could do it, and he has thousands of people listening to him, and he's putting himself out there, Yoga Soy, why can't I? And then I realized, do I really care enough to want to be a better father? It's like how you said, we can say it, but we're supposed to be in that position to steward our kids.
Right.
It's what we're talking about. And so I said, this can only, it's going to hurt, because that I will say. To be vulnerable, it hurts. You're going to be put in a position where you're going to have to deal with some stuff that you haven't dealt with before ever. In my session with Pastor, I went in it with one mindset, and I had to be vulnerable. But there was a time when we were in our session that I said, I have to drop all my cards here. I have to be the most naked person here and put everything out on the table if I truly want to expose the trauma, the sin, the things that are imparting me from. Okay, God has done a great work, but there's some areas still that I haven't dealt with. And so, me personally, I said, if I'm going to be if I care enough about my family, and I said, for the time, Lord, that I'm here, that I'm a steward of my family, my wife and my son, then I have to be the best version I can be, not just of me, but the representation of who you are, and complete whole, like everything. Mentally, spiritually, physically, all those areas. Because sometimes, we're solid in these areas, but we sort of neglect these, and we're just going to get by. And then our kid is suffering privately. Right. Our wife feels neglected. Like, all these things are happening, and we're going, and we have great attendance on Sunday. Yeah. So we feel like, I'm meeting the quota. My pastor sees me. Yeah. I'm serving, you feel me? I'm checking in. I'm doing what I need to do. But I haven't dealt with them. And so that's why I think these things were important. Let me get to this other question, because these are important to me. What are some of the steps, Pastor Jose, and if you got something, Jose, you can shoot it. Pastor Jose, some of the steps that we can take. I know it's not going to be an end-all, be-all one, because this is a process. I feel like I still need more sessions, because there's still things we haven't dabbed into that I think are important. What are some of the steps that we can take? We're going to go to break, and we're going to come back. You're going to break down some of those steps so people understand some of the things they could be doing. And then we'll talk about like what you guys are doing and also some other options that they could be looking at, because I think it's vitally important. We'll be right back right here on the Daddy Dialogue podcast. So talking about trauma here and how it affects us as fathers or just in parenting, period. Pastor Jose Fontanez, he's a psychologist, Christian psychologist, which I'm so excited to have him here. We've been going deep. You can check all this stuff out on this channel. You can scroll back. There's some really good nuggets here, I think, Alan, that people are going to get out of this. But I want to leave people with something tangible that they can start to look at. Because although when I jumped into this, I was extremely discouraged. I keep saying this because it's really important for people to get it, that I'm extremely passionate. I'm in a season of my life where I'm just excited about talking about things nobody else is trying to talk about, and having you here is such a blessing, more than you could ever understand. I've had artists, I've had all kind of people that I've been able to interview many, many years, and to have you here is just something so different for me, so refreshing. It is a confirmation from like what God is saying do, and if it gives people tools to be like, I'm dealing with these issues, here's something that I need. Like it took me an audiobook for me to react. Like I was like, I'm not scared. I'm gonna go try. And I hit you up. We spoke. I went to, and I was like, I told my wife, okay, we gotta invest. I need to go again. We gotta. There's other. I think there's more, because I've only seen the benefits of it. One thing is just to feel emotional, but when you're able, Adam, I learned this, and I'm learning this now. When you're able to dab into these deep spaces of trauma that we haven't dealt with personally, bro, there is extreme breakthrough there, bro. And if you think you're giving your wife the best version of you, there's something even better on the other side that you may be lacking, that you don't even know that you're not giving her, because it's centered there. You're restricting yourself in that area because of that. And I just feel like I don't use those words. I'm careful, because when you hear those words like breakthrough, people take it to a whole nother place. That's not what I'm saying. I just feel like there's a tremendous amount of reward on that other side.
You're mature.
Yeah, you're mature and you're willing. And I think as a married man, and you do a tremendous justice to your kids when you're able to give them a better, fuller version of you.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so what I want to get to is, what are some of the things that we could start to transition into? And I think the way I wrote it was, how can we slowly, I think this is hard to say like this. It doesn't absolutely make sense because it's not a slow reversing, or start to deal with that trauma. What are some of the steps that, if they're watching and they're questioning, like, man, there's some things internally I got to deal with? Because people know.
Right.
People can sit here and watch and be like, there's something there I haven't dealt with, and I need to go deal with it. And how do I start that? There's fear internally, because that's how it was for me. Once you go down that sled one time, because the sled was really high, so I was scared to come down. I came down it once. Okay, now I'm ready to go, bro. Like, I'm ready. Give me the next session. Let's talk about some other things. I'm more open. Not that I'm quickly to open as fast, but now there's a wanting to be like, okay, how much deeper can we dig to find some of these root issues? And so when people are watching here, Pastor, I want them to see or have something tangible so that they can start, if they're with their wife or their husband or dealing with their children, some of the things they can slowly start to do to start to reverse, or look to see like how they can start dealing with the trauma.
Yeah, so if I may, I just want to go back a little bit.
Okay, no problem.
To what you were talking about. So usually trauma creates a void, right? It creates an emptiness internally. So we as men, and just human beings in general, we seek to find what we can come across that fills that void. For some men is pornography. For some men is alcoholism. For some men is substance abuse. It can be a lot of different things. But it's interesting because the only way, and I want to make sure the men hear me on this, the only way you're going to fill that void is addressing the void. And we have to figure out what's the root cause of it. Once again, it doesn't necessarily have to be something negative. It's just something you heard, right? So usually when we get into these different addictions is because there's a void. Now, so for somebody who does alcoholism, for the most part, alcohol will shut down your system and people eventually will pass out, right? Somebody does marijuana, eventually, for the most part, it slows your body down. The next thing you know, you're asleep, right? So why do men do these things? Because they're emotionally, it brings them down, where in their mind, they're not feeling the pain anymore. They're not experiencing the
numbing,
trauma.
right?
Absolutely.
It's
They're
like
numbing themselves
numbing
with it, but what they don't realize is that they are making it worse, right?
Wouldn't that drive more guilt?
Absolutely.
I
Absolutely.
think
That's
it
what
all
I'm saying.
comes-
It's making
you're
it
right.
worse.
It all like entangles.
Yeah. So how do we address it? Then, number one, and I think writing is so powerful when it comes to the healing process of a person who has gone through trauma. I know for us, man, once again, we have difficulty expressing ourselves.
Journaling, right? You're talking about?
Yeah, journaling. You're right. So for those men who are listening to me, I highly recommend to buy a journal and start journaling. Just recently, I was with a client, and I recommended that. The client stated that they started writing. This is interesting. They started writing, and as they were writing, the pen just started scribbling all over the page. So what does that tell me? As they were writing, the pain and the trauma began to manifest internally, which did not allow them to write. Therefore, they decided to scribble because scribbling prevented them from expressing themselves. That's how deep this is,
Wow.
right?
So it's a manifestation of what's inside, and it still voids what they're trying to get out?
Absolutely.
That's how hard
Oh,
trauma
yeah.
can really
Yeah.
like get a hold of you. And the crazy thing that I've noticed too about trauma, that it could be sneaky. Like it could be sneaky in the sense that you could live with it. Like even as we're having this conversation, you can go through life with a traumatic experience that to you may not seem huge, but it's sneaky, literally stealing a piece of your life, of something, of how you interact, how you
Yes.
deal with people. It's even made me question now, as I've gone through this subject, certain things that in my marriage, I'm like, why am I like this with certain things? And it's made me which I think is great. If any man could do it, you start to look internally, and this is a whole nother conversation, but it's sneaky, and then the sad part, when it comes out, it reflects on your children, on
Absolutely.
your wife.
Yeah.
It's a drug. It just comes out.
You say that, and I want to make this clear also. Just because you address the trauma through counseling, just because you're in church, none of those two will ever erase the traumatic experience. Never. Doesn't matter how much you pray, doesn't matter how holy you are, it will not erase the experience, the memory of the experience, because your brain is a computer. It's going to be there. Why is counseling and seeking God important in this process? Because together they're going to give you the tools to help manage that trauma, where the trauma does not become an obstacle for you to have healthy relationships. So this idea of, vamos a orar y el Señor va a tirar eso en el fondo del mar y se va a olvidar de eso. Eso es mentira.
Bro,
Loco, you know how many times I've heard that? Loco?
Eso es mentira.
that's ingested into
And
my
the
soul.
and the scary thing is that is extremely toxic.
Absolutely.
We're gonna
It is
toss this
extremely
situation into
toxic.
the-
When you hear that, and this is another conversation for another day. When you understand the gospel clearly, it is extremely toxic to just word it like that and say it like, no, coge tus y tíralo en la, and you hear from the pulpit and they say it with such conviction. You're like, oh my God,
that's
that's
why
it.
so
And they
many
think it's
people
a one.
fall out.
Yeah, they think it's a one pill. Like, oh, take it, and the
Exactly.
problem is done.
Exactly.
And you're like, no. And I'm glad you said this because,
Thank you.
yeah, it's extremely important. That
And I
people
think it's
understand.
important that we clear that up because, once again, it's never going to be erased. You're always going to have it in your brain. And there's always, as long as you're living, there's always going to be something that will trigger that memory. It can be a smell.
It can be a song.
It can be a song. It can be how somebody dresses. It can be how somebody speaks to you. It can be a store that you go to. It can be a house that you go. I mean, anything can be a trigger to that traumatic event. And once again, you're going to experience, people may begin to perspire? Was it start sweating? They're going to start trembling. They're going to start becoming nervous. They're like, "What's happening to me?" The reality is that you're reigniting that trauma in you. But this is where help comes in. You're going to be able to recognize those triggers and be able to then address it when you're in front of them. So instead of perspiring and becoming nervous, you're going to be able to sort of gather yourself. Like, all right, hold on a second. I'm feeling this anxiety coming in because of the triggers. Let me take a deep breath. And this is something that is highly recommended. So when you feel that trauma reigniting, you can easily sit somewhere, whether you're in a park, a bench, whatever it is. Sit, put your feet flat on the floor, sit up as best as you can, and you're gonna breathe deep. Hold it in for a few minutes or a few seconds, and then you're gonna let that out, right? Do that for a few minutes, a few seconds, repeat it several times, and your body begins to calm down. Another thing you can do is you're going to maybe look somewhere, right? So in this place we're at, some beautiful memorabilia, right, of a lot of different sports teams. Yes, shout out to the Heat. In 6 and 7?
In 6.
All right. So then...
prophetic.
These are techniques that, once again, when you're feeling the trauma being triggered, once again, you look at something, or you may look at something else. You may look at a tree. You may look at a bird. So by focusing on something other than what you're feeling will help reduce the anxiety that you have. Now, going back to the journaling. So when you journal, you're able to write down what those triggers are. Is it when my kids start screaming and running around the house, does that irritate me? Is it the fact that my kids are always asking me for something and I may not be able to give them what they want for whatever reason? I mean, there's so many different triggers, right? So when you're able to write it down, you're able to study it and identify. So when it does happen again, you don't allow it to get the best of you. You have to be intentional. And when I'm talking about intentional is my past has shown me nothing but adverse experiences. I don't want that to be the same for me and my kids. So what am I going to do? So there has to be a shift in your mindset. I want to be different. I want my kids to have a different environment. I have to be intentional. Part of that intentionality is not only me trying to create a positive, healthy environment for my kids, but part of the intentionality is recognizing that I need help. And that I'm going to call somebody that will help me process what I'm feeling. So things of that nature. I think mindfulness, once again, for those people who are more spiritual than us, they may say mindfulness is not good. But listen, when you mix in the Holy Spirit in a moment of mindfulness, that can be a transformative moment. Mindfulness simply has to do with you recognize what's going on around you. Taking a moment, what's really going on? But in that moment when you're trying to identify what's really going on, and you allow the Holy Spirit into that moment, it can change your world. Listen, we're never going to be able to do this by ourselves. And this is where the spirituality component comes into. I'm going to do everything I can to change my life. The things I can't change, I'm going to leave that to the Holy Spirit. And that's where I think the transformative piece comes in, and I become healthier in my relationships.
With that tip, we are... This has been a great conversation. Pastor Jose Fontanez, thank you so much. PharrellsCounseling.com. Go check him out. Thank you again for taking the time, the knowledge, the know-how. I will have you on again because I think this is...
Please.
Yeah, this is extremely necessary.
We're here, man.
And to deal with some of the stigmas and things. And what I promise to do here, I'm going to say it here. I'm going to say it right now.
Go ahead, son.
The next time you come, I will pay for a session for one of our listeners. The first session to come, I will pay for it because I think it's that powerful for someone to go try it. And I hope and pray it's somebody who is struggling with like, oh, I don't know, why would I do? But that could really see. And I will be clear with this. It's not an end all be all. It's not a one trick pony. You show up, everything fixes.
Right.
Like some people are different. Some people it takes a while for them
It's a
to open
process,
up.
correct.
It's a process. There's trust involved. There's just a lot that goes with it. But in my small sample size, at least for me, I guess because the posture I took going in, it was a lot more beneficiary for me in my situation. I plan to continue to go because I know there's other things. I mean, even addressing this conversation has already internally made me think about some things that I may even have to talk to my wife when I go home about. But I think that's good. I think good dialogue like that needs to be happening. And if it's uncomfortable, it could be breakthrough on the other side of that.
Amen.
So I think it's great. Thank you again. How do people check you out? What's your Instagram? I know that's for toddlers and young kids, but you do have an Instagram and you do have a website. Give
got
that information for the
You
people.
gotta have one.
So
Yeah,
so I do have Pharaoh's Counseling does have a Facebook page and
Okay.
also Instagram page. Exactly what the name is, Pharaoh's
Pharaoh's
Counseling.
Counseling.
You can look it up, or you can go to the website pharaohscounseling.com. I do want to explain that Pharaoh's is spelled Pharos,
Okay.
right? And I say that
Not
because
the H, but
yeah, not the F. No, it's Pharos, and simply so people can understand where I got that name from. That's the Greek word for lighthouse,
Okay.
right? So that's why pharaohscounseling.com. We are a lighthouse, right, for those who have experiencing mental health issues, and to God be
Pastor,
the glory.
You low key double entendre that though,
Yeah.
because it's like kingship
Yeah,
counseling
Just
slash,
so you're clear
just so that you
on
know.
what this is, so
Yeah.
you don't get it mistaken.
Yeah.
Pastor, thank you again for your time, your dedication. We went longer than I ever expected.
.com. We are a lighthouse, right, for those who have experiencing mental health issues, and to God
Pastor,
be the glory.
You low key double entendre that though,
Yeah.
because it's like kingship
Yeah,
counseling slash,
just so you're clear
just so that you
on
know.
what this is, so
Yeah.
you don't get it mistaken.
Yeah.
Pastor, thank you again for your time, your dedication. We went longer than I ever expected.
.com. We are a lighthouse, right, for those who have experiencing mental health issues, and to God
Pastor,
be the glory.
You low key double